Yeah, my name's Charles Fain Lehman. I'm a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, contributing editor of City Journal. This will be my third year teaching for Hertog. You know, there are, I think, a lot of programs where the students are sort of in it pro forma. They don't really do the reading, they don't really engage. And I found in my prior experiences teaching Hertog, the kids want to show up, they want to engage with the material, they understand, they want to have a debate, and I want them to have a debate. The goal of the class is to get them to really engage with these ideas as living, relevant ideas, and they rise to that challenge, which is great. Be prepared to deal with sort of a broad swath of subject matter. What I mean by that is, you know, over the course of the program, you're going from Plato to very practical politics. It requires the ability to understand how those things are connected, to see the bigger picture. And so if that's exciting to you, great. If it's not exciting to you, maybe not a good fit, but be able to demonstrate that you are the kind of person for whom that is exciting and will grow from that. You know, the course deals with this sort of intellectual strain in the 20th century. It's really about the neoconservative movement, the domestic neoconservative movement, which is an underattended group in my mind. And part of what they are dealing with is, in the 1950s and 1960s, there's a great deal of optimism about what public policy can do and the harms that it can alleviate. And over the course of the 70s and 80s, it becomes apparent that many of these sort of ideal solutions are not only not working, but are backfiring, that they are causing poverty, that they are causing crime, that they were deeply entrenching dysfunction and creating a system of dependence. And so you have to sort of they then have to come at domestic policy as a counterintuitive exercise. They have to understand the second and third order effects of policymaking. That's a complicated ask, and it's been a very slow process in, you know, the American thinking about domestic policy. So it poses very thorny challenges that I think are underappreciated. It really isn't, part of the goal of the class to say, it really isn't about just pointing the money hose at things. It's about thinking very intelligently about what is the problem and what, if anything, can policy do to address it. Yeah, the day that I always look forward to the most is the last day, because it's about, the course is divided into 5 days, 5 thinkers, and the last day is about James Q. Wilson, the godfather of broken windows theory, among many others, and we talk in the last day about theories of crime and and broken windows theory, and the way in which crime rose in the 60s and 70s up to the mid-80s on the back of it. One theory, which was that crime is a structural phenomenon, and until you address the root causes of crime, you will never do anything about it. And then Wilson sort of arrives to say, that's completely wrong. You're thinking about it exactly backwards. And it's really a revolution in crime control policy, and an argument that we're still having today, and we continue to have about crime policy today. And what I think is, you know, what is remarkable about that is he does win dispositively for a while, and then it bounces back. And so you really get to see how that argument played out at the time, and recognize that it continues to play out today. My favorite thinker in the course is James Q. Wilson, who is a Harvard-educated political scientist, spent most of his life in academia, eventually rose to be president of the American Political Science Association. And Wilson is, you know, there's a classic line that people use about Wilson, which is that James Q. Wilson would come out and say something, and then 1,000 liberal sociologists and criminologists would say, no, that's completely wrong. There would be huge dispute, and it wasn't really a fair fight because there were only 1,000 of them. He's a brilliant mind who turned how we think about domestic policymaking on its head through the application of really very simple principles. Insights about deterrence and incapacitation, about the way in which people respond to incentives. You know, he had a unique skill at seeing the world in an exact mirror image to how his intellectual opponents did very effectively. So, you know, I think he's dramatically underappreciated as a thinker, so I'm always excited to introduce students to him. You know, I think in many senses, unfortunately, social policy is a lot about slogans and buzzwords still, that when we think about crime, or we think about drugs, or we think about poverty, or we think about any of these family structure, marital issues, any of these issues, we very neatly divide into sort of soft versus tough camps. And part of what I try to get at over the course of the course is, I obviously have sympathies with one versus the other, but it's never actually that simple. You have to think about it in a more complicated way. And so, I think really my goal is to convince potential policymakers who are doing the fellowship, people who will be influencing the policy process, to go, you have to go beyond the headlines. That often the voting public is sort of thinking about this in very simplistic terms, but you shouldn't be doing that. You should be able to do it in a more nuanced fashion. Yeah, actually, so my day job, I spend a lot of time on drugs and drug policy. And when I used to be a journalist, and in 2017, I think I got sent down to Louisville, Kentucky to report on the opening of the DEA's field office there. They're just opening a new one. It's right the epicenter of the opioid epidemic. And I was riding around with these DEA agents and talking to them. And I said, well, so you have an opioid problem here? And they said, yeah, and we have a methamphetamine problem here too. And I said, wait a second, nobody talks about meth. I thought that's like dead and gone. I've seen Breaking Bad. And they said, no, of course we have a methamphetamine problem here. It's methamphetamine, it's opioids, it's a whole host of drug problems. And that made me go, hang on a second. The things that I think are true, the sort of pat narratives that I've received, are not correct. And that caused me to start digging into the data and the research and sort of wrapping my head around what was actually going on. A year later, I was yelling about the pending meth crisis, and bluntly, I think statistics have borne me out in the ensuing 6 years. And have sort of made clear that what I was learning in Louisville in 2017 was going to become true across the nation in 2024, 2025. But that was really cool. It's grim, but cool that, I was able to go, there's clearly a level of what's going on here that just is not being scratched by what's being talked about in the media. And if you just educate yourself, as a journalist, if you educate yourself, if you try to understand what's going on, you will get out ahead of a lot of people.